Hello and welcome to Archaeologists Anonymous, your source for your quick archaeological fix. I am your host, Silvia, and today's episode will be talking all about the top 10 coolest things found at Pompeii. Number 1. Volcano Town. Pompeii, as you probably know, is right next to the volcano Vesuvius. So being next to a volcano actually does have its benefits because it creates all this fertile soil that's great for farming. Little did the people of Pompeii know, that fertile soil was a trap. There were actually already signs that Vesuvius would erupt, 17 years before the actual eruption happened. So there were actually massive earthquakes in 62 AD, which archaeologists have since discovered were precursors to the big eruption you know and love in 79 AD. You can see in Pompeii that some of the buildings that were destroyed in that earthquake still hadn't been repaired by 79 AD. Number 2. Pompeii was a port town. We know this because we've found evidence of the dock. We also figured out that this was a wealthy area because we've got a bunch of villas, and it had a population of around 20,000 people. It was pretty close to Rome, as you can see there.
And we think that there was a lot of seasonal migration from Rome to Pompeii, because in the summer the rich wanted to escape the intense heat and disease that could make the capital unpleasant to be in. Pompeii was a refreshing contrast, because since it was built off of a port, it was by the water, and there were cool and fresh breezes off of the sea.
So it was, in a way, like a resort or a vacation town. Number 3. Complete assemblage. Pompeii is what archaeologists like to call a complete assemblage. It's basically like, it's a moment frozen in time. We've basically got everything that was there. The ash helped preserve casts of bodies like that. It helped preserve casts of trees, so we can find out, what trees were growing at Pompeii 2,000 years ago. It even left ash cavities of pets. Yeah, it's all pretty disturbing.
When the ash buried organic remains, like trees or bodies, it hardened around them before they had time to decompose, which left cavities that are like exact molds of whatever the ash covered. The way archaeologists were able to create casts like the one seen here is by pouring plaster into these cavities, casting it into the shape of whatever, or whoever, was buried by ash.
Number 4. Roads. Pompeii's roads we actually think operated as a sewer system. So basically the idea is, refuse and mud and all the stuff that you'd want to, drain out of your city would go through the streets, which explains why there are stepping stones so that you don't have to step in all that muck. They'd walk across the street like that charming gentleman right there. We actually think they might have had a complex traffic network with like one-way roads and, different intersections through the city to funnel cart traffic.
Here you can see grooves in the street, along which cartwheels traveled 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists can use clues like these tracks to find out what traffic patterns were like.
And yes, Pompeii did have a road that led to Rome. Number 5. The Temple of Isis. Now you might be going, Isis? Like the Egyptian god? What is that doing in Pompeii? And yes, it is the Egyptian Isis. This is a great example of a phenomenon that happened around this time in history. The god of Isis actually spread throughout the Roman world and became very popular, interestingly enough. And we have evidence of that with that little temple there for her at Pompeii. And you can see in these paintings of Isis from the temple that they made her look more like a Roman or a Greek than an Egyptian. So it's sort of an interesting example of ancient appropriation and cultural syncretism.
Side note, Emperor Augustus hated how the cult of Isis spread throughout the Mediterranean because she reminded him of his enemy, Cleopatra.
Number 6. Preserved villas. Pompeii is a wonderful archaeological site because when the town got buried by the volcano, a lot of the structures, including the villas, got preserved. So we have some of the best looks into what day-to-day life was like at a Roman villa at Pompeii. You can see the modern gardening of what would have been, beautiful gardens in the Paris style, and you'd have this thing called the salutatio, where the owner of the house would, greet his clients in the morning, basically. So if you owned a villa, you'd want your house to show off what you got, and you'd set up the house so that you'd have a view from the front door, back all the way into the house so you could see the lovely Paris-style garden. And that's what flexing on people looked like in those days. So there's some examples of the view you might get from the front door, sort of back through the entrance hall of the house to the Paris-style garden. Number 7. Trade with India. Pompeii had a lot of merchant activity going on. There was imported pottery from southern France, they exported, olive oil, wine, cloth, that sort of thing. There's actually evidence of a very multilingual, multi-ethnic population at Pompeii. Pompeii actually had a local language besides Latin called Oscan. So we've got Oscan inscriptions, Greek inscriptions, of course Latin inscriptions, we even got Hebrew inscriptions. And check out this. This is a good that made it all the way from India to reach Pompeii, so it's evidence of how widespread and interconnected the world really was in 79 AD. It must have been really exciting and sort of surprising for the archaeologists who found that in Pompeii, a Roman city. Number 8. Mosaics, mosaics, mosaics. We have found so many mosaics at Pompeii, including this really famous one that shows Alexander the Great fighting Darius III of Persia. So I do like the Alexander one, and it is probably the most famous from Pompeii, but my personal favorite are these mosaics from the front entrances of houses.
Some of these household dog mosaics also have cave canem written on them,
which literally means beware of dog. And I love that. That's evidence that we have not changed in 2,000 years. So yeah, Pompeii is great to look at Roman mosaics because everything was so well preserved under the volcanic ash and pyroclastic flow. Number 9. Big public buildings. In classic Roman fashion, Pompeii has a bunch of really cool public buildings. It had, public baths, public water fountains, 2 different theaters, and it had one big amphitheater that could hold 20,000 people. And Pink Floyd. You'll remember that I said the population of the town was 20,000? And you're like, did the entire town show up for stuff at the amphitheater? Why could it fit 20,000 people? Well, it was actually because people from the countryside would, travel into Pompeii to go see the different gladiatorial fights or games or whatever was going on in the amphitheater. So from the size of this amphitheater, we can tell that, people were coming in from the countryside to go to Pompeii to be entertained. Number 10. Preserved paint and paper. So when the town got buried, a bunch of the scrolls charred, but actually preserved since they were carbonized. Archaeologists are actually working on technology that would allow us to scan in the scrolls and digitally unscroll them, because if you did that in real life, they might fall apart. So, stay tuned on what interesting insights those scrolls will bring up once we are able to read them. One of the other amazing things that preserved was frescoes, sort of painted walls in the buildings, which typically don't survive, and certainly don't typically survive in such good condition. The Romans like to paint stuff on every single wall, so if an ancient Roman saw a room like this, they'd probably be like, it's a little bare, isn't it? So yeah. But it means that we've found some amazing stuff, like that portrait, this sort of fantasy architecture that they like to paint on walls, paintings of gladiators, which everyone loves, and also this painting, which we think might actually be from a secret underground cult. It's actually from a villa called the Villa dei Misteri, which, yes, literally translates to House of Mysteries. So, that's a brief overview of cool stuff found at Pompeii. Not all of the site is excavated, so we could still find all sorts of cool stuff at Pompeii.
I should mention that there are so many other cool things at Pompeii that I just didn't have time to cover in this video. This is by no means an exhaustive list.
If you're interested in learning more about Pompeii, I would highly recommend this book, The Fires of Vesuvius. Alright, that's the end of the episode. Please feel free to watch another video, like and subscribe, and I've been Silvia of Archaeologists Anonymous.
But if you use your eyes, you can see an almost perfect assemblage. And if you use your eyes, you can see the town a little like it was. How am I gonna be an optimist about this when all the skies are raining pumice?